Meghan Markle has just done the unthinkable, and insiders are calling it the final blow that could completely shut down Prince Harry's dream of ever returning to the UK. Because what was once being described as a possible reconciliation path with the royal family has now reportedly collapsed behind closed doors, and the reason is not politics, not the palace, but something far more personal and far more explosive. Multiple unnamed sources are now whispering that one private decision, made in California, has completely shifted the direction of Harry's future, and it may have permanently ended any realistic chance of a UK comeback. And what makes this even more shocking is the timing, because this wasn't supposed to happen now. Negotiations, discussions, and quiet attempts at rebuilding bridges were allegedly still ongoing. But something changed. Something snapped. And according to insiders, Harry is now facing a reality he did not expect, that the door to Britain may not just be closing, it may already be locked from the inside. Even more disturbing are claims that tensions inside the Sussex camp have reached a breaking point, with one side pushing for stability and the other allegedly pushing for complete separation from royal structures forever. And if these leaks are true, then Meghan's latest move may not just be a personal decision. It may be the moment that ended Harry's UK future once and for all. But what exactly happened behind the scenes, and why are palace insiders suddenly calling this situation irreversible? The truth is far more shocking than anyone is ready for. The story between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has never been simple, but insiders say what we are witnessing now is something entirely different, a slow-burning collapse of hopes that once seemed realistic inside royal circles. Because not long ago, there were quiet discussions happening behind closed doors about whether Harry could ever return to Britain in some limited capacity. Not a full return to royal life, but some form of reconciliation, a soft re-entry, or at least a functioning relationship with the institution he was born into. But that possibility, according to multiple unofficial sources, was always fragile. Harry's journey away from the royal family began with explosive interviews, emotional revelations, and a complete relocation to the United States alongside Meghan Markle. What followed was a series of public controversies, media battles, legal disputes, and a growing divide between life inside the monarchy and life outside the system. And Meghan, insiders claim, became the most defining force in that transition. Some observers describe her as someone who pushed for independence, control, and commercial freedom, while others argue she simply aligned with a life Harry was already leaning toward emotionally. But what is becoming clearer in recent leaks and commentary is that these two paths were never fully synchronized. Because while Harry carried the weight of royal identity, duty, and institutional legacy, Meghan was building something entirely different in America: a brand, a media presence, a commercial identity that required distance from royal constraints, not closeness to them. And this is where the conflict begins to take shape. Because reconciliation with the royal family does not just mean emotional healing, it means structural reintegration into a system that operates under strict rules, expectations, and public accountability. Insiders now suggest that even the idea of Harry returning in any official or semi-official capacity was already causing internal disagreement within the Sussex circle. Not everyone was aligned on what returning to Britain actually meant, or whether it should happen at all. And this uncertainty, according to sources, created a silent tension that was never fully addressed publicly, but continued to grow behind the scenes. At the same time, the royal family itself has been dealing with its own internal pressures, health concerns, and public scrutiny, which makes any potential reintegration even more complicated than it appears on the surface. Because this is no longer just about Harry returning home. It is about whether home still exists in the same form it once did. And according to insiders, that question is exactly what is now tearing the situation apart in ways the public is only beginning to understand. But what triggered the first real rupture, and how did a private decision reportedly turn into a public crisis? That moment changed everything. What sources are now describing as the breaking point did not happen on a public stage, and there was no official announcement, no formal statement, and no visible confrontation. It happened quietly behind closed doors during what was supposed to be a routine discussion about future planning and travel arrangements. But according to insider chatter circulating through royal commentary circles, the conversation quickly shifted from logistics to something far more serious: the direction of Harry's entire future. Because the issue was no longer just about visiting the UK. It was about commitment. And that is where everything reportedly began to fall apart. One side of the discussion, according to leaks, was still open to the idea of occasional appearances in Britain, maintaining ties, keeping communication open, and preserving a minimal relationship with royal institutions. But the opposing position allegedly pushed a much more decisive direction: a full break from any structured royal involvement and a complete focus on building a life permanently centered in the United States. And this is where the tension reportedly escalated. Because Harry, insiders claim, was still emotionally attached to the idea of reconciliation. Not necessarily returning as a working royal, but at least restoring some level of connection with his homeland, his family, and the institution he grew up in. But Meghan, according to unnamed sources frequently cited in commentary circles, was reportedly far more focused on stability in California, protecting existing commercial projects, and avoiding any step that could pull them back into royal obligations. That difference in direction allegedly turned a private conversation into a heated disagreement. And then came the first twist. A claim began circulating that a final decision had been quietly influenced not just by personal preference, but by timing around upcoming projects, contracts, and long-term brand strategy considerations that made any UK return far more complicated than previously assumed. In other words, this was no longer just about family reconciliation. It was about business structure. And that shift reportedly changed everything. Because once the conversation moved from emotion to logistics, from reconciliation to practicality, the possibility of a UK return allegedly started collapsing in real time. Even more shocking, some sources now suggest that after this turning point, internal communication within the Sussex circle became noticeably more restricted, with fewer details being shared even among close associates. And that silence is what has fueled the next wave of speculation. Because when decisions stop being explained, people start assuming the worst. And what happened next would take the situation far beyond a private disagreement and into something much larger than anyone expected. After that private rupture, what insiders describe as controlled tension quickly shifted into something far more unstable. Because within days, the narrative around Harry's possible return to the UK began changing in real time, first subtly, then in a way that became impossible to ignore. At the surface level, nothing official had changed. There were still no public statements, no confirmed cancellations, no formal announcements. But behind the scenes, according to commentary sources, communication patterns reportedly shifted. Plans that were once described as under discussion began to be referred to as uncertain. And then suddenly, they were described as not currently prioritized. That single change in language, insiders claim, is often where royal-related negotiations quietly die. But the real escalation began when external observers started noticing inconsistencies in expectations being discussed in media circles versus what was actually being prepared privately. Some commentators still spoke about a potential UK appearance window, possibly tied to upcoming public events and obligations. Others, however, began suggesting something very different, that any structured return had already been effectively paused indefinitely. And this is where the second twist enters the story. Because according to unverified but widely circulated insider chatter, Meghan was allegedly not just reacting to the idea of a UK return, but actively restructuring priorities around the assumption that it would not happen at all. That shift, if accurate, completely reframes the situation. Because it suggests this was no longer about negotiation. It was about pre-decision adaptation. And once that shift happens, reversal becomes significantly harder. At the same time, social media speculation exploded. Hashtags began trending across commentary platforms questioning whether reconciliation with the royal family was even still on the table. Fans and critics clashed over every small detail, every travel rumor, every vague scheduling change, every appearance omission. Some accounts claimed insider leaks pointed to final alignment decisions already being made behind closed doors. Others dismissed it as recycled speculation with no real substance. But the noise only grew louder. And then came the most unsettling development yet. A report circulating in royal commentary spaces suggested that even within supportive circles of Harry's UK return idea, confidence had begun to fade, not because of external opposition, but because internal agreement was no longer stable. In simple terms, the foundation itself was reportedly shifting. And when that happens, everything built on top of it starts to weaken. What makes this stage so volatile is not a single confirmed event, but the accumulation of small signals that all point in the same direction, even if no one officially confirms it. And now, with both internal alignment and external expectations drifting further apart, observers are asking the same question. Was this ever realistically going to happen at all? Or was it already slipping away long before anyone noticed? But what the public doesn't yet see is that the reaction to all of this is about to reach a completely new level. As soon as the whispers around Harry's UK return began shifting from possible to unlikely, the reaction outside the Sussex circle turned immediate, divided, and increasingly emotional. Because in the absence of confirmation, speculation filled every gap. And that is where the situation started to spiral beyond private interpretation and into full public debate. On social media, the split was instant. One side argued that the entire narrative was being exaggerated once again, that couples in high-profile positions constantly adjust plans, shift priorities, and reconsider travel without it meaning anything deeper. They pointed to past moments where similar rumors had circulated, only to fade away without consequence. But the opposing side saw something very different. They argued that this wasn't just about scheduling or speculation anymore, but about a long-term structural reality finally becoming visible. That group began circulating theories that the UK return narrative had always been fragile, dependent on conditions that were never stable to begin with. And as those two camps grew louder, so did the emotional tone of the discussion. Hashtags, comment threads, and viral clips began framing the situation in increasingly dramatic language. Words like final, over, blocked, and ended started appearing far more frequently than anyone official was willing to confirm. Meanwhile, commentary channels and tabloid-style analysis outlets amplified every small update. A change in wording here, a missing appearance there, a vague scheduling adjustment somewhere else, all of it was being interpreted as evidence of a larger collapse. And even though no official statement supported these interpretations, the narrative momentum was already building on its own. Inside industry commentary circles, the conversation became even more layered. Some analysts argued that this was less about personal conflict and more about incompatible long-term strategies. Others insisted that too much weight was being placed on limited information, warning that public perception was running far ahead of verified reality. But regardless of which side they took, almost everyone agreed on one thing. The story had reached a point where perception was now shaping reality as much as facts were. And that is what made the situation so volatile. Because once a narrative reaches that stage, even small developments are no longer neutral. They become confirmation for one side or the other. Every absence becomes symbolic. Every appearance becomes strategic. Every silence becomes meaningful. And in that environment, the pressure surrounding Harry's potential UK return increased dramatically because it was no longer just a private decision being discussed behind closed doors. It had become a public test of direction, loyalty, and future intent. But just as the debate seemed to settle into familiar patterns, a far more unexpected claim began circulating, one that shifted attention away from public reaction entirely and back toward the internal decisions that may have triggered all of it in the first place. And what that claim suggested would push this entire story into its most controversial phase yet. Just when the public debate seemed to stabilize into two predictable camps, a new layer of claims emerged that completely reframed everything that had been assumed so far. Because according to a fresh wave of unverified insider chatter circulating in commentary circles, the real turning point was not a disagreement about travel plans or even a difference in long-term lifestyle strategy. It was something far more decisive, something that allegedly happened privately and was never intended to become public at all. Sources being quoted in discussion threads suggest that a final internal decision regarding the UK return scenario was not just debated, but effectively closed off after a specific private conversation that shifted the entire direction of planning. And the most shocking part of this claim is not just the decision itself, but the implication that Harry may not have had the same understanding of the outcome as others around him. In other words, what some observers are now suggesting is a misalignment in expectations at the very highest level of decision-making. One side allegedly believed the UK return pathway was still open, still flexible, still part of ongoing planning, while another side allegedly treated it as already resolved and moved forward accordingly. And this is where the narrative becomes significantly more complex. Because if even partially true, it suggests this was not a dramatic public ending, but a quiet internal closure that only became visible later through external behavior, absence patterns, and shifting priorities. But that is not the only claim now circulating. Another layer of commentary suggests that the timing of this alleged decision may have been influenced by external pressures, ongoing projects, brand commitments, and long-term strategic planning that made any UK-focused scenario increasingly difficult to maintain without major disruption. And once those factors are introduced into the equation, the situation stops being purely emotional or personal and becomes structural again. Which brings everything back to the same central argument that has been echoing throughout this entire discussion. Was the UK return ever realistically viable in the first place? Or was it always a fragile idea being carried forward by optimism until reality slowly forced it into retreat? What makes this moment so critical is that no single version of events has been confirmed. There is no official clarity, no definitive explanation, no publicly acknowledged turning point, only competing interpretations of silence, timing, and absence. And that is exactly why the uncertainty continues to grow. Because in stories like this, what is not said often becomes more powerful than what is. And now, as attention intensifies once again, observers are beginning to focus on what happens next rather than what may or may not have already happened behind closed doors. Because another public appearance is approaching. Another set of travel decisions will soon become visible. Another opportunity for interpretation will arrive, whether anyone is ready or not. And when it does, it may either reinforce the current narrative or completely dismantle it. But until that moment arrives, one question continues to dominate every discussion, every analysis, and every speculative thread online. Was Meghan's influence the final factor that ended Harry's UK return for good, or is this entire narrative still missing a crucial piece that no one has uncovered yet? And the answer remains just out of reach for now. So now the question is no longer just about Harry, Meghan, or the royal family. It is about what you believe is actually happening behind the scenes. Because on the surface, everything still looks controlled. Carefully managed statements, carefully timed appearances, carefully chosen silence. But underneath that, a completely different picture is being painted by insiders, commentators, and conflicting interpretations that all point in different directions. And this is where your opinion matters most. Do you believe Meghan has now completely closed the door on any possible UK return for Harry? Or do you think this entire narrative is being exaggerated and that reconciliation is still quietly possible, even if it looks distant right now? Because both sides of this argument have strong voices, but only one version of events will eventually match reality. And until that moment arrives, the speculation is not slowing down, it is only intensifying. If you found this breakdown compelling, make sure you stay connected for the next update, because this situation is still developing, and every new appearance, every travel decision, and every silence could completely change the direction of the story again. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because this is one of those stories where public opinion is becoming part of the narrative itself. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next development in this story might just be the one that changes everything once again.